Good morning, everyone. Today, I'm going to be talking about how critical race theory is essential for trans liberation. My name is Akasha Anarchy. I am a non binary person of trans feminine experience. So let's get into it. All right, first, we're going to go over a few definitions. The first one will be race. Race is defined as the notion of a distinct biological type of human being, usually based on skin color or other physical characteristics. Next, we're going to define racism. Racism refers to any program or practice of discrimination, segregation, persecution, or mistreatment based on membership in a race or ethnic group. Thirdly, we're going to define ethnicity. Ethnicity is the fact or state of belonging to a social group that has a common national or cultural tradition. So, obviously, race and ethnicity are different, but they can also be like linked. Like you can have an ethno-racial group, like Black people in America, for example, are an ethnicity and also a racial group. Let's see. Someone can be like in a Spanish-speaking culture, like ethnicity, but be like white or black racially. So that helps clear that up a bit. All right, now, what is CRT? CRT refers to the study of the relationships between race, racism, and power. It builds on critical legal studies and radical feminism and considers conventional civil rights and ethnic studies. Yet it offers broader perspectives on economics and history and calls into question equality theory, legal reasoning, constitutional law, and other foundations of liberal order. Basically, it's a way of interrogating all the ways racism has shaped our current society. Um, let's start with this. Okay, so racism was created as a way to justify the transatlantic slave trade, where Europeans, in the largest forced migration in history, kidnapped, I think it was like 11 million enslaved Africans and brought them over to America. And the issue was the type of things outlawed in Christianity, and it's also outlawed legally. But in order for them to justify doing it, they had to say that the enslaved Africans were a different type of human or subhuman species. So this is where the idea of race actually comes from. Now, how that relates to our institutions is look at things like Ivy League schools. Those schools were built by slaves, and they were built by slaves, and they were attended to by the wealthy elite of society. And when the wealthy elite would go to these schools, they would get an education, and they would come back and they would teach like a Eurocentric curriculum that focused solely on like European cultures and stuff like that. And by excluding descendants of African people, it's created this almost this ivory tower of just racism in academia, which unfortunately as a graduate student I struggle with often. But that's how race has shaped our education, because it basically just reifies the white supremacist, notions that went into founding those Ivy League schools. But moving on from Ivy League schools, we can see how it um, affects our criminal justice system. The war on drugs. The war on drugs was it was a ploy to incarcerate as many black, indigenous, and poor people as possible, and it's been working very well. Um, there's in 1865, slavery didn't exactly end in America. There's a loophole in the 13th Amendment that states that slavery is legal if you're being punished for a crime. So basically, in order to keep up the slave labor that has fortified the American empire for so long, they had to criminalize certain groups of people, mostly black people, poor people, and crime is a social construct, punishment is a social construct, and they came up with this system to enslave people. A quarter of the world's prisoners are housed in America right now. So America has a quarter of the world's slaves. Think about that. Because technically, slavery, they're slaves. But, you don't call them that. They call them prisoners because, it's a great way to obfuscate, truth through language, which I've noticed that empires are very good at. But anyway, I digress. The war on drugs was basically a genocide against those groups of people, and we see how like mass incarceration has really affected and devastated a lot of communities in America. However, it's also enriched a lot of corporations because it's basically free labor or labor for next to nothing that a lot of the jobs, because in a lot of prisons, one, they're for profit, so they have to keep them full. So, yeah, basically the private companies rent out these prisons to the state, and the state has to keep them full. So in order to keep the prisons full, they have to keep arresting people for bullshit. So in order to do that, they have to keep criminalizing different things. But, yeah, they have to keep these prisons full. But anyway, in these prisons, a lot of the times, the prisoners have to work, or they're required to work, or they need to work to afford, basic sustenance. And what they'll do is they'll outsource their labor to different companies. Usually, a lot of times they're like weapons manufacturers, and like Lockheed and Martin, Boeing. They make like America's like war, toys or whatever. I probably shouldn't refer to them as toys, but you get what I'm saying. Like the instruments of imperialism that America uses to colonize and subjugate, the rest of the world. So that's how it kind of like affects more like the broader um, social fabric of America. But get into let's get into a little bit of like how like race and gender intertwine, and we'll do that by talking about the Combahee River statement. I think I'm gonna go live on here, maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, and read it just for those people that may not have access to it, maybe due to financial reasons, maybe due to like you just live in an area where like black feminism is really censored, because I know there are people that are really abjectly opposed to liberation movements. So, but anyway, there were these black feminists, and what the Combahee River statement was, one, it was named after Harriet Tubman. It was named after a campaign by Harriet Tubman that freed 750 slaves in Port Royal, South Carolina. It was the first ever American military action that was led by a woman. So, shout out to my girl Harriet. But it's so anyway, the statement was these queer women got together and they were proposing, well, they were positing that they couldn't separate their gender from their race because they felt left out of the white feminist movements. Which a good quote from the statement is, we struggle with black men against racism, but we also struggle against black men, with sexism. And I think that was a very profound statement that kind of sums up like intersectionality and a lot, because they felt left out of the white feminist movement because white women didn't have to deal with the same racial issues that black women and other women of color and other minority women have historically had to deal with. So the Combahee River Collective was like a way of them addressing this lack of representation. And what the statement put forth was that people cannot separate their identities. You know what I mean? Like, it's someone might be, gay and Jewish and they can't separate that. Like, it affects like the way they're perceived in society. Like, and The problem with it is you have to deal with interlocking forms of oppression because, you still have to deal with the racism on top of the, gendered homophobia, queerphobia, transphobia, etc. on top of that. Okay, so now that I kind of like laid that out a little bit, the whole concept of gender was sort of okay. Time out. Before I start with that, I just want to say that pre-colonial times, I'm not gonna like say that there was no concept of gender. Though I'm sure there probably were societies that had no concept of genders. It's just gender was very different, and probably in a lot of, for lack of a better word, I'm just gonna say pre-colonial societies. I don't want to say tribal. Tribal sounds kind of loaded, but anyway, in a lot of pre-colonial societies, um, gender was very mm, fluid. Like it may not have been like what we would consider like man or woman, but there were definitely like roles and rules that people had to follow, but they were very fluid. Like according to like some of my research, there was a lot of like transsexualism, transgender people. There was a lot of like just same sex. What we would consider today to be same sex, relationships going on. Just when the Europeans came and colonized like a lot of these areas, they forced their very rigid gender roles onto these people that we see today, and a lot of these gender roles, spewed from the Christian religion and other European philosophical doctrines at the time that were just imposed on these people at the point of a sword. Because it's a good idea if you have to threaten people with murder to accept it. But anyway, these roles were forced onto people, and we're still forcing them onto people, and that's why I think that CRT is essential for trans liberation, because people need to understand that this, just like race, is a social construct that comes from the notion of this whole biological essentialism, which basically means that there's an essence to people. Like if you're born in a certain body, there's an essence to you that you cannot help. And it's where a lot of racism and misogyny comes from. You can really see it a lot in our society if you really just pay attention. But anyway, yeah, when the Europeans colonized a lot of these indigenous societies and African societies, they were forced to live under the yoke of colonial oppression. And what a lot of the colonizers would do is they would grant those that presented as men or masculine, according to their standards in the society, they would grant them with special privileges. So it would behoove, not behoove. It made the gender, whatever the stratifications or the whatever the stratifications and wherever the separations were within those cultures, it made them even worse because now they were oppressed, but they were given special privileges just because they were men basically. So that led to a lot of we still see that today. So that led to a lot of like intercultural sexism and misogyny that you still see today, because again, when people are oppressed and they can only take out their oppression on women and LGBTQ people, because you can't punch up because you're oppressed. So we still see that a lot today in society, and again, that's kind of what the Combahee River statement was referring to. Especially when she said we struggle with black men against racism, but we struggle against black men, about sexism. That's kind of more what they were alluding to, and it's similar in any oppressed culture that you can see. So, yeah, that was just kind of like a brief overview and why I think it's important for trans liberation, because in order, like, for people to really understand the trans experience, they really have to understand that a lot of these gender roles are constructed. And that's not, to negate, the obviously internal, struggles, we deal with dysphoria and stuff like that. And just living in a society that's just so vehemently and vitriolically opposed to our existence. But it is what it is. I just wanted to make this video because I just wanted to come at this from like more of a leftist perspective. I like what I'm saying on YouTube, but like I just don't feel like it's going far enough. Like I don't feel like people are really like addressing how to solve these issues. There's nothing against them, everyone's got their thing. Everyone's going to come at this, their own way. But like for me, like I think we really need to get into like some real leftist critiques. Like we need to get into like CRT. We need to talk about like maybe things like dissolving the nation state and the dissolution of empire and abolishing the nation state in order to really understand what it would take to completely liberate everyone. Because in and of itself, the state is a hierarchical institution that can only survive through oppression. It can only survive as there is an underclass. It's the way the nation state works. It's the way capitalism works. There has to be an underclass. So the way the underclass has been crafted and constructed socially has been through race, and through race you get things like gender. And again, it all goes back to biological essentialism. So we need to abolish these unjustified hierarchies, and we really need to just get these conversations going, because in order to start a revolution, you need to have a revolutionary idea pattern. You need to have a revolutionary paradigm, a revolutionary, you need to have like a revolutionary conversation going on, because, you get these ideas out there and people are going to develop on them. They're going to grow on them. They're going to improve on them. They're going to, they're going to disperse them. Instead of like just the same old, hey, everyone vote harder, vote Democrat, that has done very little for us. And again, I'm not saying like, there's not some concessions that can be won at the local level. Obviously there are. You can win concessions at the local level, that can help improve the material conditions of people. But, overall, there's just so much more, we can do if we look at this from a leftist perspective, and we look at this more as like globally and the effects of empire, and we look at people in the global south and we stand in solidarity with them. But I'm going on for a bit, and I was trying to keep this around 15 minutes, so see you guys later. Stay metal, and always remember, yeah. If you want to hear more of that, like and subscribe.